Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to take, an opportunity to correct the record on a couple of things. We often hear from our colleagues across the aisle that 90% of the fentanyl is seized at the ports of entry. Well, if you make the statement that 90% of the fentanyl that is seized at the ports of entry, well, that's correct. But oftentimes what we hear from the left is that 90% of fentanyl coming into the country is seized. We know for a fact that that math is absolutely wrong. If you put the amount seized at the ports of entry as the numerator, and the total amount seized as the denominator, yes, that's 90% of what's seized. And on the denominator would be 90% plus 10%, right? But what's missing in that denominator is all of the fentanyl that gets into our country that we have no idea is seized. So you can't technically say we're seizing 90% of the fentanyl that's coming into the country. That's factually incorrect. It makes no mathematical sense. And in fact, the Border Patrol itself is saying that we're actually catching about 5 to 10% of the fentanyl. So if it's 90% of what is seized at the port of entry, which I agree that statement is correct, it's 90% of 5 to 10% of the total. And that's an important point of distinction. I'd also like to talk a little bit about this CBP One app that my colleague from Mississippi mentioned. And all the other efforts that have been elaborated on by this administration, their efforts to maintain control of our border. Look, when they came into office, the budget didn't decrease suddenly. The number of Border Patrol agents didn't decrease suddenly. There was no new legislation that was written. What happened were 89 effective policies of two administrations that were completely undone by executive orders. And it resulted in an immediate incentive to come to the United States. They did away with all the disincentives of the pull factors of people coming into our country. And what happened is people came, they tested the system, they were immediately released into the country. Deportations were ordered to be halted. Over 1 million people with deportation orders that a legal process had determined they were supposed to be returned. Well, we're just not going to deport them. So the phone calls went home and people poured across our southern border. And this incentive then was seized on by the drug cartels. They saw a huge opportunity. And so they flooded the crossing sites with people paid, interestingly enough, paying coyotes to bring them there. When I was down on the southern border, and that's sort of at the strategic level, right? They neutralized the Border Patrol at the crossing site, and then the fentanyl and other things come around between the ports of entry. That's the fentanyl we're not seizing. By the way, that's the fentanyl that has resulted in the street price of fentanyl in Tennessee going from $95 in January of 2021 to $28 just recently, according to the sheriffs of Tennessee. That supply-demand means more fentanyl is pouring into this country. So talk about 90% of it being seized. That is a false statement. And talk about the policies that supposedly are attempting to gain, are getting border control. That is incorrect. The incentives have allowed and empowered the drug cartels to take advantage, neutralizing the Border Patrol at the crossing sites. Back to the tactical level, on one of my visits in Arizona, we actually saw a scout from the cartels. And the Border Patrol agents and the law enforcement in that area informed us that those scouts have military-grade encrypted radios. They have military-grade optics that they're using, and from their vantage point, observing Border Patrol, they then notify someone else with this encrypted radio. They send 20 to 30 people to basically overwhelm that Border Patrol agent on the border. And while that individual's tied up, they send the fentanyl. That's when the carpet shoe wearing backpack fentanyl that results in drop sites just inside the border, where I saw hundreds of empty backpacks and carpet shoes, where the drugs are then placed into the hands of a courier in the back of a truck and transported to cities all across America, resulting in that supply. Make no mistake about it, the actions of this administration to remove those policies have resulted in this crisis. And one of the other policies that they so effectively have taken care of, Title 42, that will end tomorrow, will result in a catastrophe of epic proportions, already breaking records, and we see them massing throughout Central America to come into the United States. Now, you can have good intentions of wanting to help every person on the planet. That's great. But by making that something that taxpayers have to do, you're basically determining what someone else should be doing with their charity. And maybe somebody in Tennessee, our taxpayers, they want to do something for Gold Star families. Maybe they want to give to a different charity. Maybe they want to give to one of the NGOs that want to do something. But they should be the ones getting to decide, not the federal government telling them how their charity should be given. That's not freedom. And I'll tell you, the policies that have been canceled, that have resulted in this crisis, that have resulted in the cartels taking over 5 of our sectors of our southwest border, all on Joe Biden. Title II being canceled, and Alejandro Mayorkas. Title 42 being canceled, and what's about to happen, state of emergency in cities all across the southern border, coming across, make every state a border state, Joe Biden and Alejandro Mayorkas. So I think it's really important we correct the record on some of this stuff. Now, I want to make one other point, and I want to warn my colleagues across the aisle. You know, President Biden promised to veto the D.C. crime bill. Remember that? He said, we're going to veto that bill. And the Senate said, we're not going to vote for that. And you know what our Democrat colleagues did here in the House? They all voted no. And then the furor happened in America. And the president realized, boy, that'd be a big mistake. And the Senate said, oh my gosh, we're not going to do that either. And so the Senate voted for the D.C. crime bill. Now, the Democrat colleagues here in the House are going to have to go back and explain why they voted no when their party on the other side of the aisle voted yes, and their president changed his mind and signed that bill into law. And you watch the next couple of days as the border gets worse and worse, and that Americans become more and more and more aware. We're going to pass this bill. You can vote no on it. But as those senators get more and more aware of this crisis, and that president has to look at what's happening to El Paso and Brownsville, he just might change his mind again. And guess who's going to be left holding the bag? You don't want to vote no on this bill. This bill will secure our southern border. This isn't an immigration bill. We never set out to handle immigration with this. That's coming. This bill secures the border so that we can deal with the immigration issues. Because what we can't do is create even more incentive with an open border. That just does what Mr. Mayorkas and Mr. Biden have done, create more incentive that brings more and more people in and overwhelms our social services, overwhelms our schools and hospitals. As this thing unfolds over the next few days, don't be surprised if the president changes his mind again and you're left holding the bag. I reserve.